Alright, let's give this question a good shot. The amount of times I've sifted through this topic on Reddit, Discord, and many other innocent questions from people just wanting to know who amongst Genshin's playable cast of characters is truly Teyvat's most powerful being. It may be a horrible idea to do this before a region that's probably going to introduce a whole ass new power scale to Teyvat's lore is gonna come out, but screw it. That just means that I'd have another excuse to make another one of these videos when the time comes. Hehehehe. Between long arguments, existential crises, and words that probably cannot be repeated freely in YouTube, people have pretty much agreed that the answer to this question lies between three individuals. You probably already have a good idea of who they are, but before that, let's get rid of the ones that should obviously not be up for consideration, but we'll just need a quick mention again because I swear to God someone's gonna bring them up in the comments anyway. To begin with, this video is only going to discuss beings originally from Teyvat and is playable, so we can let the heavenly principles and the shades take a short walk out the window. So is Skirk, as she is a literal alien. The travelers, while probably not making the list in their current state to begin with, are out of the equation, though of course you can probably argue that since the Abyss sibling is now included in Irminsul that you can technically categorize them as a Teyvat native, but to keep things simple, they are still out of the equation. Not that we'd have enough to analyze their strengths to begin with. Beyond that, I also want to give the conclusions through two different mediums instead of just having one overall scenario to think about. The first medium is to determine who is strongest in practice. Basically, this is the conclusion I reached just by taking into account all the in-game feats of said individual that we have both seen and been told about strictly on their surface value. And the other medium is to conclude who is the strongest in theory, which would require a bit more lore digging to reach a conclusion for, while still maintaining the consideration of the character's present state in the story. I kind of find it necessary to make these differences because this is where the points of contention usually crop up when it comes to actually drawing a conclusion to this question. So I find splitting it up to these two scenarios to be the most, let's say, diplomatic way of providing a conclusion. We'll start with the in-practice scenario first. And like I said before, there's really only three candidates to the answer, and the only thing that the two scenarios change is really the order in which the three of these characters would eventually be listed. Coming at number 3, we have Neuvillette. Now, this may seem like a shocker considering the fact that he is the current undisputed ruler of Hydro and is a literal sovereign. The biggest point of contention that people have for immediately putting him at the top of the food chain is simply due to the lack of in-game feats, both present and direct historical feat that would contribute to the showcase of his raw power in comparison to the other two candidates. While being able to alter the course of a 500-year prophecy by pretty much either crying or using a wave of his hand, whichever metaphor you want to use, and pretty effortlessly beating a gigantic space whale definitely already puts him far above the rest of the Genshin cast in terms of feats alone. It is generally considered that it is not quite enough in quantity to overshadow the more directly shown feats that the rest of the people on this list would have, as while it may showcase overwhelming power, his perceived inexperience in wielding it and lack of further direct combat application is what will end up restricting him to, though not at all unimpressive, number 3 in terms of practical show of power and overall strength. Taking the runner-up spot, we have the Geo Archon himself, Zhongli. From the records of the Archon War, the notion that he won a war that was so brutal that it turned an entire river into a river of blood, Guyun Stone Forest essentially being his trophy island of gods that he had sealed, as those massive stone spikes were said to have been Morax's own stone spears. And even beyond the gods that he ended up sealing there, he was also known to be one of the gods that ended up forcing Enkanomiya's god serpent Orobashi to flee away into the light realm to begin with. His historical reputation as the warrior god and the fact that he held Lia's front lines for over 3,500 years is also a testament to the endurance and experience that would vastly tower over any other foes that he would come up against. The point that ended up holding him back to second, however, is that he is shown to have clearly slowed down. While we don't entirely know by how much, it's heavily implied that he has struggles that will affect his present combat and overall prowess as a warrior and as a force of war. It would indeed be logical for people to assume that he has slowed down just to age alone, and the fact that he tried his best to avoid even being in the same space as Neuvillette could be a teaser to his uncertainty in actually being able to deal with the newfound sovereign. However, his feats are definitely his saving grace, and even through the representation of Guyun Stone Forest itself, it should be enough of a case to still place him second. And for the final spot in terms of practicality and power, we have Raiden Shogun topping the charts. As of present Genshin conditions, she is still the only Archon to have directly shown the great magnitude of her current combat prowess and overall power state, while also having the massive historical feats to back her up. The giant gash that her Muso no Hitotachi left that is now known as the Musojin Gorge, the remnant of Orobashi's ginormous remains, another proof of the power that her slashes can pack, her sheer presence as a combative force as we try to deal with her during the Archon quest, and the fact that she spent another 500 years trapped in a battle against her puppet and never faltered is simply the most direct showcase to the testament of her drive, willpower, and endurance in the face of godly combat. Couple that with having what is virtually an indestructible body in the form of the Shogun puppet, it was clear that she had martial prowess and frontline longevity as one of the key features to her mission of actually maintaining and achieving eternity. Sure, she has a lot of trauma that she probably needs to work through since she seems to be much more affected by them compared to her contemporaries, but the all-round present and historical feats that she has shown, and the notion that she doesn't entirely have that obvious of a weakness other than not entirely having her own body, makes her for a solid first choice for being Teyvat's current strongest in terms of practicality. However, all that was just in practice. Now we are gonna fully take everything into account and begin to look things in a more theoretical standpoint. And there's a reason why I kept Raiden Shogun's picture up here, and that's because, like I said, the order has changed up, and she finds herself being the third in this list in terms of theoretical power. In all honesty, the comparison for her really stems between her and Zhongli, because while the historical feats would still give the edge of their power comparison to the good old Geo Archon, A should undoubtedly give you a bit more confidence in terms of what she can show you in their present state of Teyvatian existence. However, the main reason why I would still give the number 2 edge to Zhongli is still very much due to that wealth of experience that Zhongli would no doubt have in droves against that of what A has. While A is an absolute combat freak, we have no clue as to how effective her strategy and method to facing fights would prove to be against beings that can rival her power just by default. She definitely has more of a brute force I will just try to fight things until they give type of mentality, and said mentality was such an obvious trait of hers to the point where her deceased sister had the foresight to pre-move help from before she died. Because she knew that A would choose to do something so fundamentally idiotic like go on a battle of eternity to prove her point rather than seeking help for a change. While being fearless and going into battle headstrong can definitely be a benefit of a trait to have given certain circumstances, it could lead her to trip up in the moments that require that little bit more of a thought process. Or would just put her in a tactical disadvantage if she were to go up against someone who can definitely outwit her. And in terms of outwitting, there's really no one who's done it better than Zhongli. From running away from his boss, keeping his mouth shut about Khandria, to faking his death to trick an entire nation, the man has the type of strategies that could probably even give him all 4 path wins in a single game of Civilization. While he has definitely shown his age, we can definitely still count on him to still be tactically sound. And while he may be rusty, we are still talking about the rust of someone who's been known as the epitome of a warrior god for over 3,000 years, and have been around the block for even longer. There are more chances of him knowing more about his opponent more than what his opponent would know about themselves. His endurance and usage of the power of Geo should also still be a giant factor that can give him an edge to absolutely wear out even combat freaks like A. Because remember, while A did endure a 500-year battle against the puppet, it was more of a test of will rather than skill. When faced with someone whose moves can't entirely be anticipated, A will no doubt struggle to immediately do anything meaningful to Zhongli should their powers ever come to clash. Now, as you all should have inferred, this, in theory, leaves the seat of the most powerful Teyvat being to fall onto the hands of Neuvillette. And the reason is quite simple. He is now a full-fledged, unrestricted sovereign. You know who was the only force that was able to beat his kind down? The heavenly principles with the help of their 4 shining shades, the beings that created most of present Teyvat's life to begin with, and it still took them 40 years to do so. The authority over the elements was theirs to begin with, and being the literal prime existence of each of their elements, there is just simply no doubt as to how humongous their natural power should be. While yes, his present feats may not be numerous in quantity, but I'd say the quality of his feats are enough to showcase the difference in just how much more his unrestricted authority of Hydro can achieve compared to the previous authority held by the Archons that are both chained through the Seed of Divinity and Celestia. Like I said before, he overturned a 500-year-old curse placed upon his people by the gods who created them, pretty much by shedding tears. And if people were still willing to say that Capitano looked like he was about ready to go for another round against Mavuika, then Neuvillette looked like he was more than ready to go another 10 rounds without breaking a sweat against the all-devouring Narwhal. I mean, look at that dude. Man was styling on the damn thing, whilst getting ready to pummel his ass back into the abyss. That right there is the swag of a guy who knows that there ain't nobody that's gonna be beating his ass around these parts of the town. Oh yeah, and he also one-stomped Child even without his sovereign powers. And while yes, Child is no supreme deity or whatever, but it's still Child. If the guy had a finger that he could still lift to finger your ass, he'd do so. So to knock his ass out cold while once again styling on him was still quite something to see. The other biggest argument I used to see against Neuvillette, other than the whole inexperienced stuff, was the notion that the sovereigns weren't actually that powerful because they still lost to the heavenly principles. How powerful can someone be if they lost? Again, let me remind you, it took those gods from beyond the skies 40 years to beat those sovereigns, and their rematch essentially left the heavenly principles partially disabled in terms of maintaining full authority over Teyvat. Getting beat doesn't automatically mean that they are suddenly weaker than an Archon who can't even fathom the powers that those primordial beings hold on their fingertips. Like, Muhammad Ali got beat by Joe Frazier once. Do I now immediately think that I can beat his ass had I been a boxer back then? Hell nah! People need to understand the power differences between an Archon and a Sovereign. It's like if Bruce Lee were to try and fight Muhammad Ali bare hand. Yes, Bruce Lee was perceived to be an exceptional martial artist who probably could have beaten anyone in his practice in his prime, but from sheer size and difference in just the pure mass of power an Ali punch would have, Lee would have stood no chance. Even Lee himself said it through Robert Claus's book when observing an Ali documentary. Look at my hands, that's a little Chinese hand. He'd kill me. Now think of it as if the Archons are Bruce Lee and Neuvillette with the power of a sovereign is Muhammad Ali. That's the power difference right there. There's a reason why Neuvillette is so very confident in wanting to hold the Archons accountable for them being part of the usurper schemes. Guy knows that those Archons stand no chance against him. The fact that Zhongli even avoided Neuvillette should also further prove this point. Neuvillette is now the prime embodiment of Hydro, the existence of Pneumosia itself, and ostensibly can do whatever he wants with the Hydro element, until there is either another playable sovereign or a new playable force that is then said to canonically have powers that can rival that of a sovereign. Neuvillette will always, by default, be by far the strongest playable character that we'd have from Genshin's canon. Now, onto some honorable mentions because there are a couple of names that certain people like to throw into the convo due to the image that their feats have set for the general players. Number 1, we have Mavuika. She one-punched Man the Abyss back into the depths of the Night Kingdom. On the surface, yeah, that's a feat that would have put her up there with the other Archons. But she achieved that by using Renova's powers and had to rely on the Gnosis to sufficiently strengthen herself to be able to handle using Renova's power. And had Capitana not been there, she would have had to die for it. So, by proxy of it not being her own power that allowed her to achieve that, she doesn't quite have the history that would put her near or above those other 3, who in comparison have achieved most of their historical feats even without the power of the Gnosis. That being said, Mavuika is human, so maybe if I were to make a most powerful playable humans list, then maybe she can sneak herself in. I don't know. We'll just have to see in the future. The last of the beings that I'll be talking about is Nahida. Simple reason for people to argue for her is that she can just delete others from Irminsul and pretty much erase their existence without having to fight them. To that I say, well, we don't even know if she can do that anymore. To begin with, she never knew that she had to delete anyone. We don't entirely know if she still has the authority or knowledge of her authority to fully delete someone the way Rukada Huta was able to do. And we have more evidence of the notion that trying to delete yourself or someone else from Irminsul records wouldn't entirely erase the existence of said individual, especially when it wasn't super cleanly done. So no matter how much prep time you might give her, it will be highly unlikely that she'd be able to do anything of the sort in the first place. And beyond all that, Nahida is probably the squishiest target any other god could aim for. Though you'd be an absolute asshole for even wanting to hurt this baby in the first place, there is no hiding from the fact that she is pretty defenseless once anyone gets to her. Lack of combat endurance in the highest pressure moments can definitely be her downfall, based on what we have now. Oh, and wait, sorry. There is actually one more person that I have to bring up for you guys to consider, and this might just about change the whole perspective of this conversation as to just how powerful a Teyvatian person can really be. And maybe, just maybe, this might be the person who's actually the strongest in Teyvat. And of course, I'm talking about the man, the myth, the absolute legend who has managed to keep their Omega powerful presence away from the eyes of the players. And that man is none other than Jiang Shi, the fisherman. If you know, you know. And that's it for this video. Who knows, Notcry looks like it's about to bring a sizable amount of change to Genshin's canon power scaling, or at the very least, makes it a bit more clear for people to analyze and theorize about. But then again, these lists can change anytime the story wants, and we shall see what Notcry will bring. Until the next video, the name's Leafy, and I'll see you all next time. Sayonara.